I've always loved the idea of entrepreneurship. It's always been in my bones. And I think what really attracted to me, to me at the beginning wasn't necessarily, the opportunity for money, but it was the opportunity for how you can change the world. I really quickly realized, that business is probably the most powerful tool for change, more powerful than war, disease, politics.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast, a show where we spotlight companies making money by making the world a better place. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and if you share a passion for using commerce to solve many of the world's most pressing problems, then this is the show for you. Welcome to episode 27 of the Business for Good podcast. Lately, I have gotten a few requests, I guess more like in the past month or so, to do an episode not in an interview format, but rather more of a monologue in which I talk about my own experiences in the entrepreneurial world. Now, much of my work is designed to help promote the good work that others whom I admire are doing in the hopes that it will inspire some people to perhaps do something similar. That's what my book, Clean Meat, is about, really shining a spotlight on entrepreneurs and investors and scientists who are racing to commercialize the world's first slaughter-free meat. And it's also what was the primary intent behind creating this podcast 27 episodes ago. But if you think that you'd find use in me sharing more of my own experiences sometime, let me know. Maybe we will do an episode about that. I'd welcome hearing what you think. You can just go to the show's website, businessforgoodpodcast.com, and hit me up there. All right, now on to this episode. You know the story. There's a bright college student who drops out of an Ivy League school to embark upon an entrepreneurial journey, founding his own company and building into a major success along the way. No, we're not talking about Mark Zuckerberg here. Instead, we're talking about Tom Szaky. And instead of building a social networking platform that would eventually be exploited by both domestic and foreign powers alike to sway elections, Tom's company would come to be used by domestic and foreign powers alike to find a useful purpose for the trash that we also casually throw away. As you'll hear in the interview, Tom is an immigrant whose family fled Hungary after the Chernobyl disaster, eventually sending him to Princeton, where he quickly dropped out to launch his startup called TerraCycle. Their goal, as his company doubts, is to make, quote, recycling the unrecyclable not only feasible, but desirable and profitable, exclamation point. It's part of their slogan. The basic idea is to take trash that no one else is going to recycle and find ways to profitably reuse or recycle it. While Tom founded TerraCycle as a teenager, the company has now partnered on such trash repurposing projects with major brands like Coke, Pepsi, Proctor & Gamble, and more. TerraCycle has more than 300 staff and brings in nearly $50 million a year in annual revenue. It won't come as a surprise to you then that Tom was named the #1 CEO under 30 by Inc. magazine back in the mid-2000s. Well, today, Tom's no longer under 30. And we've got him here on the Business for Good podcast to share his story of how TerraCycle is using the power of commerce to make something useful of the mountains of trash we humans are so skilled at creating. So without further ado, I give you Tom Szaky. Tom, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Great to be here.
All right. Thanks so much for taking time to chat. I know that you are running a big company doing really cool things. But before we get to talking about what you are up to at TerraCycle, I want to hear a little bit about what led you to this entire idea of using trash to actually make goods that people would want to purchase. So let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I've always loved the idea of entrepreneurship. It's always been in my bones, and I think what really attracted to me, to me at the beginning, wasn't necessarily the opportunity for money, but it was the opportunity for how you can change the world. I really quickly realized, that business is probably the most powerful tool for change, more powerful than war, disease, politics. And then, going to university, and I had a couple of little tiny startups under my belt at that point, nothing too substantial, but, had gotten the bug. And I think maybe that sort of utopian university thing, I was starting to think about purpose a lot. And what really took a lot of the wind out of my sails in entrepreneurship was the way business was taught, at least 15 years ago, was that the purpose of business is profit to shareholders. And while I think profit is ridiculously important and a good indicator of health, I didn't feel like that was really the reason. I felt like the reason should be, what do you do? What does your business do? What type of service or product does it create? And so I was really looking for business with purpose. And garbage became like the perfect topic because it is very unexplored relative to how big it is. I mean, everything in the world will become garbage one day. So for how big that topic is, It's relatively unexplored, maybe because we're sort of repulsed by it. And there's all these sort of strange economic principles at play, like, we're willing to pay to get rid of it, and so on and so forth. And so that's how TerraCycle began, really seeking this idea of purposeful business and falling in love with the concept of waste. And for 17 years, we've since then enjoyed straight growth and now have some good scale behind us.
Amazing. Good. Well, I want to hear all about that. But before we get there, I'm really intrigued, Tom. You mentioned that by the time you got to college, you already had 2 startups behind you. So you had gotten this bug. What was it that led you in the first place to think, hey, I am a teenager and I'm going to start a company?
Well, so for me, it was the lack of opportunity. So I was born in Budapest in 1982, and back then it was still communist under the Iron Curtain. And we left in '86 when Chernobyl happened. It was sort of a moment where we could escape. I mean, like political refugees, or not like, as political refugees. And then by the time I was 7, I got to Canada, which is obviously a really entrepreneurial country, sort of like the United States. And I think by not having had access to it when I was a child, I really, fell in love with seeing it, in the flesh, and the ability to create anything you wanted. And if you work hard and you have a good idea, you could make anything of yourself. And that just never existed, in the place I was born. And I think it's that lack of that really inspired me.
Wow. So when you were fleeing Chernobyl, were you within the range of danger there, or was it more preventative?
I mean, in a nuclear meltdown, right? So it's all relative. We were definitely not in the heart of it, but there was effects. So the reason the borders struggled a bit is because the entire agriculture system in Hungary was affected by it, and so there was a moment to effectively leave. I don't think I was necessarily poisoned or affected by the fallout itself, but let's call it the political or economic ramifications definitely had a ironically positive effect on my family. So very negative on the country overall.
For sure. Did you watch the HBO miniseries?
It's funny you ask. I've watched it. It's been very busy for me recently, so I haven't had a chance to do the whole thing, but I am in the middle of it.
Oh, okay. What's your verdict so far?
Oh, I think it's a very honest, description. I think, it's always important to look at the Western portrayal of communism with a grain of salt, just like the communist portrayal of the West, you have to take with a grain of salt. So, as long as you keep that in mind, I think it's a very honest description. But in the West, we like to really not look at any of the positives of socialism, only the negatives.
Yeah, I think it was widely acclaimed, the miniseries on HBO about Chernobyl, but I think one of the criticisms was that there was a portrayal of the USSR as being kind of this like hapless, ineffective regime that couldn't control its own nuclear facilities, when in reality they had some of the world's top scientists at that time, which may be falling into the issue that you're talking about here.
Well, I think that's right. There's in TV shows, there's a great, I think it's Netflix TV show called Comrade Detective, which is a TV show that was a Romanian communist TV show. And they just dubbed it with some pretty famous American voices into English. And it's a great TV show to watch for anyone who is used to the Western perspective on communism, because this show was the communist perspective on the West. So every time an American is portrayed, they're overweight, eating hamburgers, looking at porn, that's the sort of perspective the East had on the West. And it's actually really enlightening to see the other side's take on the whole sort of slanted perspective.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd like to watch that for sure. That sounds really intriguing. Okay, so you go from fleeing Chernobyl, moving to Canada. As a teenager, you're getting this entrepreneurial bug. You're in college. You're going to Princeton. What happens with trash that you decide, I think this is what I want to make my life out of, trash?
To be very honest, like the sort of light bulb moment was, once we'd gotten into the schools we wanted to get into, and I was very happy going to Princeton. My friends and I, we started to relax and grow some, pot in our basement. And it wasn't as, let's say, that whole idea of marijuana wasn't as culturally accepted 15 years ago as is today. So, you have to be a little bit more circumspect about it. And my friends did it in Montreal, and they could never make the plants grow well. And then one day I get a phone call saying that the plants are doing incredibly well. And I drive up from New Jersey to Montreal, where they were going to school. And in fact, they were. And it turned out that the secret sauce was taking organic kitchen scraps, feeding it to worms, and taking the worm poop and feeding it to the plants. And while that's not rocket science, anyone hearing this who's ever gardened before in their lives will be like, yeah, this is totally makes sense. For us, it was. And that sort of opened my eyes to this topic of waste. And the deeper I dove, the more exciting it became, because garbage is something we are inherently repulsed by. We don't want to be in the industry. As such, it is super uninnovative relative to its scale, but it is so immensely large. I mean, literally everything we own will be property of the garbage industry. So for that sort of invertedly massive scale, it's amazing how much opportunity in any industry where there is scale and lack of innovation, I think is ripe for entrepreneurial disruption, or whatever you want to call it, but entrepreneurs to get involved.
Okay. I'm with you on all that. So what does TerraCycle do? How do you actually make trash into a profitable business for you? What's the model?
Absolutely. So TerraCycle basically has taken the position to try to do everything normal waste management companies do not do. And coincidentally, because of that, we're now in 21 countries. In more countries than not, the largest garbage companies in those specific countries have bought minority interests in our business. So in Canada, Waste Connections, biggest garbage company in Canada, bought 25% of our Canadian business. And that type of example exists all over the world. And I mention that because let's first talk about what a normal garbage company does, and then I can really illustrate what TerraCycle does. So a normal garbage company is going to first look at whatever garbage they're picking up from you, and whatever they can sell at a profit, they will first put that aside, and that's what we call recycling. Anything a garbage company can make money at, that's recycling. So your aluminum cans, paper, PET bottles, and everything they can't make money at, which is the majority, they will destroy as cheap as possible within the laws of the land. In the United States, that would be landfilling, and say Germany or Japan, that would be incineration. And that's the role of a garbage company. It's a logistics company that is urban mining and then or destroying material. So what we do, we have today 3 divisions. The first division of TerraCycle focuses on collecting and recycling what garbage companies don't recycle. Now, they're like dirty diapers, cigarette butts, chewing gum, cosmetic waste, toothbrushes. These are all things that can be recycled with a little bit of science and know-how, but it costs more to collect and process them than the results are worth. So we make this model work by going to stakeholders like the brands. So for toothbrushes, say Colgate, or the cosmetics, say L'Oreal, or you name it, and they fund our ability to create national platforms to collect and recycle these things. And it could even be retailers or cities funding that economic difference. And with that, we're able to make just about anything meaningfully recyclable. So at scale.
Why would they do that? So I know that you're partnered up with Procter and Gamble, Coke, and Pepsi. Like, what's in it for them to pay you to do this?
So let's just take P&G, just because that was the first one you mentioned. With P&G, we do everything from recycling blades and razors with Gillette to recycling diapers with Pampers. And the punchline is basically that when Gillette makes their razors recyclable, people love that product more and will choose to purchase their next razor as a Gillette or Venus razor, and less likely competitive razor. So, and it's also something that everyone can feel really good about. But the driver of it is, what business value does it bring? Or if you had said a retailer, like we just ran a massive car seat recycling program at Walmart, where we collected, I believe, just under 1 million baby car seats for recycling.
Wow.
And in that example, that's a great driver of foot traffic into the store, right? And you're doing it with purpose, so everyone feels really good about it.
So what do you do with 1 million baby car seats? Like what then happens?
Sure. So in every waste stream, we look at first, is it reusable? Car seats are not, and I'll take diapers in parallel. Diapers are not either, but clothing, toys, electronics are. So we do look at reuse. If that's not possible, we look at upcycling. In car seats and diapers, upcycling is not possible, but in like juice pouches or chip bags, you can upcycle them into really cool bags and things. And then the vast majority of the volume is the science of the waste. So we have a whole floor of labs and amazing scientists who develop solutions to these waste streams, where a diaper can be recycled into plastics and other really neat materials, and a car seat can be shredded, and the plastic recycled, the metal recycled, and the fiber recycled into new products. So just about anything with some thinking can be processed and collected. The key, though, is making sure there's a strong business model behind it, which is where in the car seats Walmart comes in, or where in the diapers Pampers comes in.
So some of these are getting recycled into new things. Others are being kind of like refurbished into products that then get sold, right? Like, for example, the drink pouch brigade. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there's three solutions to waste, right? So reuse, which we do with like electronics, is where we clean and then sell for the same purpose it existed. Like a cell phone becomes a cell phone, just a used one. In the one you had mentioned, like the drink pouch recycling program, which are like Honest Tea juice pouches, for example, is the sponsor there. There, you can't reuse them, but you could take them as pouches and sew them together and make things like bags and really cool, upcycled products. Noting that we collect so much in that anything we can't upcycle, which is still the majority, we shred and melt and make into recycled objects. Those are the three main solutions: recycling, upcycling, and reuse.
So with Honest Tea, Seth Goldman, their
Yes.
CEO, was a guest in an earlier episode on our show and was a fantastic guest. So if you haven't heard the Seth Goldman episode, definitely go back and listen to that. But let me ask you, Tom, how do you get those drink pouches? So let's say I purchase an Honest Tea pouch. It's kind of, for those not familiar, it's kind of like Capri Sun, but it's Honest Tea, so it has less sugar. So I have that pouch. Normally, I would throw it into a trash can because I presume it's not recyclable. How does TerraCycle actually obtain them?
Yeah, so first, you're absolutely right. Today, juice pouches are not recyclable. And coincidentally, Seth has been a longtime friend of mine, and he was one of our first partners ever at TerraCycle while he was running Honest Tea. And now he's off to doing amazing things with Beyond Meat and just, phenomenal sustainability entrepreneur. So if anyone out there is interested in this topic, he's a great guy to check out and read about. So back to the drink pouches, right? So they're not recyclable today municipally because it costs more to collect and process than the results are worth. That's the economic imbalance. So through Honest Tea's funding, we're able to set up a program where consumers can go to TerraCycle.com and become a collection location, and we give free shipping and even a small donation for every juice pouch collected. And I think that particular program has already collected about 250 million pouches and donated, I believe, in the millions to charities in doing that. So it has some good scale. And then when the pouches come in, some of them we clean and then we sew them into bags and pencil cases. And the vast majority, we shred them up and melt them into a plastic, which then can make everything from playgrounds to park benches to frisbees and trash cans and all sorts of plastic products.
That's really interesting. So I would have thought that would be like one of the more difficult things to make something out of. But now let me throw you a real hardball. What do you do with cigarette butts?
Sure. So we're actually going to be celebrating our 1,000,000th cigarette collected and recycled really, really soon. So we're quite excited about it. We do cigarette recycling in 11 countries around the world. And there, the scientific process to cigarette recycling is we collect them, we shred them, and then we separate the organic bits, which is the ash, tobacco, and paper, and compost that. And then we take the filter, which is made from a plastic called cellulose acetate, and make that into amazing plastic products like ashtrays, park benches, shipping pallets, so on and so forth.
Interesting. Did you happen to see the research? I don't know if it was research or an observation. It was several years ago where it found that many species of birds were actually keeping their nests both warm and pest-free with cigarette butts as a liner.
Yeah, this is horrible. This is the challenge with nature and waste, is that nature doesn't know the idea of waste. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I've written, now 5 books on the topic of waste. And it always comes back that, waste is a very new idea, really invented in the 1950s. So nature hasn't had a chance to evolve the understanding of it. So when a bird sees a cigarette butt, it thinks it's a twig and builds its nest from it, though it's filled with massive amount of carcinogens and really nasty materials. Mm-hmm. When a turtle sees a plastic bag floating in our ocean, they think it's a jellyfish and eat it, And that's not because they're dumb. They just haven't been able to evolve the understanding of something so bizarre as waste.
Yeah, I totally hear you on that, Tom. From my recollection of what I read, though, there actually was some type of a benefit that the birds were finding, like, for example, that the cigarette butts, the nicotine and other chemicals were actually acting as a natural pesticide to repel parasitic mites.
Okay. All right. So fair. Look, yes, and it's also a flame retardant. And so maybe the bird nest has a lower chance of catching on fire, but yeah. net, I would not want anyone to construe that as a positive. I think that's negative,
It's an interesting thing. I'm certainly not advocating throwing cigarette butts out so birds can
it would be like
nest.
saying the benefit of having cancer is you don't have to cut your hair,
Yeah. Okay. Good point. So anyway, so is there anything so far that you have found that is just truly waste that you don't think you can do anything with?
So the answer is no. But where we can't offer programs is maybe where we're legally not allowed to. There's certain legislation that forces, for example, like expired pills to be incinerated, and there's no opportunity to collect and recycle them. And those are smart laws. I'm not in any way suggesting that those laws be changed, but there are in many cases legislative issues where certain waste can't be recycled, but they're there for a good reason and should be there.
Interesting. So tell us about Loop. What is it and how is it important to TerraCycle?
Sure. So Loop is our newest division. You can check it out more at loopstore.com in the US. And it's a platform that aims to solve waste at the root cause. In other words, so there never is waste to begin with. And the simple idea of Loop is how do we bring the idea of the milkman back? And Loop has partnered now with most of the world's major producers, as well as many amazing retailers. Here in the US, Walgreens and Kroger, with almost every major consumer product company you can imagine. And what it does is that when you go shopping at these stores, today online and in June in select stores, you'll be able to find your favorite products from Haagen-Dazs ice cream to Tide laundry detergent in beautiful, hyper-durable packaging from stainless steel, aluminum, glass, and engineered plastic of all your favorite products. And then when you're done with these packages, instead of throwing it out, owning it and throwing it out, you put it into a reuse bin. So it still feels like throwing out. The companies give you back deposits on the packaging, and instead of going to a landfill, an incinerator, or even a recycling center, goes to a cleaning facility where it gets cleaned and reused and filled again, eliminating the entire idea of waste in the process. And then, maybe after 100 uses, when that container hits its inevitable end of life, then it itself gets recycled back into itself.
That's really, really cool. So people can go to your website to figure out how they can participate in that, right?
Yes, absolutely. So you can go to TerraCycle.com to learn more about Loop, or directly to loopstore.com if you want to go right to it.
Okay, cool. So, one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading more about you, Tom, is, you are taking things that would otherwise go to landfills and making something useful out of them, which of course is a real good. What about the efforts to just make trash that is biodegradable? Obviously, it's not going to happen, let's say, with like glass or aluminum, but with plastics, there are some efforts to actually start degrading plastic. Are you investigating anything like that? And what's your thought on it?
No, it's a very, very good question. And so we actually worked closely with Tesco, which is the leading retailer in the UK. And I'm using that example because Tesco recently publicly banned biodegradable plastic from their stores. By the end of 2019, so the end of this year, you will no longer be able to buy any biodegradable object in the number one retailer in the UK. And so I want to tell you why, because that really will give a good understanding of the issue with biodegradable. Now, biodegradable plastic, or plant-based plastic that degrades, is really smart in emerging countries, poor countries, where today waste is primarily littered. If waste is going to be littered, it's better that it's littered as biodegradable than littered as durable. However, in wealthier markets, developed countries like the US, Canada, the UK, France, Australia, these places, biodegradable plastic is actually really bad. And the reason it's bad is because where you would put it, which is industrial composting in a green bin, the industrial composters who would take this material view it as a contaminant. And they will then go and sort out the plastic from the compost before composting it and destroy it. Because what they want to compost is not the biodegradable plastic, but the food waste that's inside, the banana peels, the coffee grounds, the yard clippings, so on and so forth. And the key reason is that while biodegradable plastic will degrade in the composting pile, it serves no value to the compost. It's dead. It has no micronutrients, macronutrients, no bacteria, all these really, really important aspects. And so composters don't want to see it in their feedstock.
That's really, really interesting. So you're suggesting that this advent of these so-called biodegradable plastics that we see now may not actually be a net good?
No. And in fact, Tesco has publicly banned them. And again, that's one of the leading retailers in Europe. But many retailers have banned it, just not done so publicly. And many major manufacturers have done the same, just not done so publicly. So it may not be, something that people know about, but internally, many of the world's biggest companies have mandates that they will never release a product from biodegradable materials. And you would know that if you work at them.
Oh man, it's like you're punching me in the gut here. I always thought that when I got like some biodegradable fork or plastic cup that it was actually preferable, but I'm certainly going to have to look more into that. So the alternative to what you're doing is just to landfill then pretty much. So what's so bad about landfilling? Is there really a big problem with it?
Great question. And I think, the key issue with landfilling is not actually the landfill itself. Landfills themselves, yes, they produce some methane, they take land use. So on their own, they're not, they have some negative impact, but I wouldn't want to paint a landfill as a horrendous environmental thing. What is really bad about landfilling is not the landfill, but the fact that then you have to create all these objects from scratch again. You have to mine them. You have to, grow them, harvest them, cut down trees, kill animals, extract more oil from the ground. And the extraction of goods, the making of things, is by far the most environmentally damaging thing in the world, by far. And in fact, every environmental issue that anyone talks about, whether it's climate change, deforestation, species reduction, waste, all begins with objects being created. That is the cause of everything.
So would you suggest that, just to take an example, that it would be better from an environmental perspective to, let's say, buy a used car with an internal combustion engine rather than a new car that's all electric?
Absolutely. And even better is don't buy the car at all, right? So
yes, right.
Important to note, not consuming is the best vote you can possibly cast by far. If you are going to consume, used is always preferable to new because you avoid making the thing to begin with. Just imagine, yes, a car has emissions, right, when it drives, but the environmental cost of the mine that extracted the steel and the aluminum and the plastic to make that car is phenomenally environmentally expensive.
Some people talk about how landmines are actually really more like gold mines of the future, that people are going to be mining through them to pull out all these valuables. Sure. Can you see that as part of TerraCycle's future, to actually go through landfills today and start collecting trash from them?
Yes, I could see landfill mining one day being economical. Today it is not, and it only will be if oil gets to, say, 10 times more expensive than today. And one day it will, and when it does, yes, landfill mining will be something interesting. But it has to be way more expensive than it is today, way more.
My concern about landfills is less about the environmental harm today and more that in the future they could pose a risk to wildlife and so on. That if they spring leaks, or even if our civilization were to end, and then at some point in centuries or millennia into the future, these could be very dangerous places for the successors of our planet. But most people don't think that far into the future, of course. But it is something that I've thought a lot about how the future damage that they may pose, and why it's important to leave the planet a better place, even for those of us who aren't going to be living at that time.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think, that's just like the bird in the nest, that one's just more immediate. But I think these are all very important things, as we don't, as people, we're not good at thinking about our externalities, whether they're immediate externalities or long-term externalities. We're just not great at that. We're much better at thinking about ourselves and our needs.
Yeah, well, yes, there's a lot of evidence to support that. So, Tom, you started this as a teenager, right?
Yes, that's right.
And now you're doing over 20 million in sales every year. Is that correct?
This year we'll get to just under 50.
Under 50. Wow. Okay. So how many people do you have working at the company now? And how has that process of growth been for you to go from 0 to nearly 50 million?
Wow. I mean, that's a big question, but I would say, we today have just over 320 office team members, spread across 21 countries. And then we have a lot of people who work in our facilities, but those are all third-party facilities, many of them who only do work for us, but, they wouldn't be our employees per se, like co-packers, type work. But it's been amazing. I think, really it's the team that helps make this company be what it is. I, luckily get to dream, and, the team is out there helping to, make some of these dreams a reality. And I think that's the amazing part about having a great team and a great organization, is you can effectively manifest your dreams. And the bigger the team, the more resource you have to make the dream manifest quicker and faster and bigger than ever before. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about entrepreneurship that I absolutely love, is that effect.
How did the company get funding? I know that you said that some of these major garbage companies take minority interests in the company. Do you have, or are you venture backed? How have you kept this entity afloat?
Sure, absolutely. So we have a whole range of investors. We have strategic investors like the waste management companies. In Loop, we have strategic investors like consumer product companies, packaging companies, and so on. And then we have a lot of what I would call impact funds, family offices, and high net worth individuals who have made investments in TerraCycle. I think, through various financing and various vehicles, I think we have brought in, this is not a formal quote, but I think just around 50 million or so in investment capital.
Wow. And have those investors seen any return? Do you guys do dividends? Is there any prospect for an exit for them?
Yeah, so absolutely. In some of our entities, we do dividends. We just paid a dividend on TerraCycle US recently, I think of a few percent. And some have also bought and sold their shares and made a gain on the growth and equity value.
And at some point, on the private market?
On the private market today, yeah, absolutely. But at some point, we may go public. It's not something we're 100% on, but we're very seriously looking at it. And our revenue is getting to the point where it could justify maybe in a year or two a NASDAQ type IPO.
Okay, and you're not interested in an acquisition, though.
Look, there's always it's always an opportunity. If someone comes with a really big number, we would seriously look at it. But let's say for now, our focus is growth, and even an IPO would lead to more growth.
So what's the vision? Obviously, growth is important for you because you not only want to provide return for your investors, but also you want to accomplish your mission. But what's the vision? If you look back at the end of your life and you think that TerraCycle achieved all that you had hoped it would achieve, what would it have done?
Yeah, obviously we want to create the biggest impact possible on waste. That is the macro goal. The dream would be to eliminate the idea of waste. I think that's, a big, hairy idea. I don't know how, if we're going to accomplish that, but the closer we can get to it, the absolutely the better. And, we feel that we have a unique opportunity to be the most innovative garbage in the world. People have called us the Google of garbage, and we think, every day we're living up to that name just a little bit more.
Nice. The Google of garbage. That's a great epitaph on your tombstone.
There you go. Right.
So, you, again, started as a teenager. Now you are the CEO of this pretty large startup where you have hundreds of employees, tens of millions of dollars in revenue. Are there any resources that you would recommend, Tom, for folks who look at your success and think, I would like to do what that guy did? Are there books that you read on how to, on business or on leadership, or are there speeches or any other resources that you would recommend to aspiring entrepreneurs who want to make a difference in the world?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest inspirational books in my life was Natural Capitalism by Paul Hawken. So I think he's, is an incredible book to think about this idea of purposeful capitalism. And I just put up my a recent book that came out that I wrote in January. It's called The Future of Packaging, which if you're interested in this topic of sustainable packaging, that's something that I definitely recommend to have a look at.
Okay. And finally, Tom, just to end us on a positive note here, why don't you share something with our listeners for which you personally are grateful?
So I'm grateful that I think, every person out there in corporate America that I've met wants to make the world a better place. They may be in a difficult position because their companies, may have KPIs or goals that don't align with environmentalism. But I'm grateful that the people out there want to do the right thing. And if they're given the opportunity to do so in a way that makes sense for their organization, they will take advantage of it, no matter what company they work in, big tobacco, big oil, big pharma. And to me, that's very optimistic because I think the world can be better if we all, focus on providing these opportunities.
No doubt. Well, on that note, Tom Szaky, we really appreciate all that you're doing. We are rooting for you, and we appreciate you coming onto the show to share your success and what you're doing to help make the world a better place.
It's my pleasure. It was great to chat today.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found use in this episode. If so, don't keep it to yourself. Please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And as always, we hope you will be in the business of doing good.